The Mississippi Department of Corrections is a state agency of Mississippi that operates prisons. It has its headquarters in Jackson. As of 2020, Burl Cain is the commissioner. In 1843, a penitentiary in 4 city squares in central Jackson was developed as Mississippi's first state prison. The prison in Jackson was destroyed during the Civil War, and the state did not replace it for decades. Instead, the state conducted convict leasing prisoners to third parties for their labor. The lessees held custody of the inmates and provided their room and board. Often substandard, the state made substantial amounts of money from these arrangements, which created an incentive to have minor infractions criminalized in order to arrest more people and sentence them, increasing the number of crimes for which persons could be arrested, such as vagrancy, resulted in an increased pool of prisoners to lease out, as many could not raise enough cash to pay fines or fees that were sometimes imposed. Most prisoners were freedmen. The state used this system to extract labor from former slaves and keep them suppressed socially. The state officially changed its policy at the end of the 19th century, saying that prisoners sentenced by the state could no longer be hired or leased by third parties. Effective after December 31, 1894, after ending the convict leasing system, the state of Mississippi began to acquire property to build prisons. The state bought the Rankin Farm in 1895 in Rankin County, 12 miles. The prison properties were largely self-sufficient, raising their own crops and livestock, as well as commodity crops such as cotton for the state to sell. All the labor was by prisoners. The State Department of Corrections was established in 1976 to oversee the existing Mississippi state prisons. Both federal and state laws were passed during various campaigns of wars on crime and wars on drugs. Not only were new behaviors criminalized, but politicians supported mandatory sentencing and lengthier sentences. By the end of the 20th century, Mississippi had one of the largest state prison systems in the country, with a rising number of persons incarcerated even as crime rates fell. A disproportionate number and percentage of African Americans and other people of color have been incarcerated under these policies. In addition to the major state prisons, the state developed many community detention centers for prisoners with lower security classifications. They were provided as workers to numerous locals, in part to prepare them for reintegration into society after release. Because of the dramatic climb in the number of prisoners and demand for space, the state legislature authorized MDOC to enter into contracts with for-profit prison management companies for the construction and operation of private prisons in the state. By the early 21st century, the state had contracts with operators of 6 private prisons. Civil rights groups and prisoner advocates have filed class action suits in efforts to improve prison conditions and protect prisoner rights. As a result of such a suit against Unit 32 at Mississippi State Penitentiary, the state and the ACLU worked out a settlement in 2006 that changed processes and dramatically reduced the use of punitive solitary confinement in the state. In 2009 and 2014, the state passed legislation to provide more flexibility in sentencing and parole of certain classes of prisoners, reducing the prison population and returning nonviolent offenders earlier to their families and communities. Changes in sentencing laws dramatically increased the prison population. In 1995, the state legislature passed a law requiring all prisoners to serve 85% of their sentence. The prison population more than doubled from 1995 to 2007. From 11,250 to 22,800. Far outstripping capacity of the 3 state prisons. Beginning in the late 20th century, the state dealt with the rising need to incarcerate individuals by contracting with private prison management companies, who built and operated a total of 6 prisons for state prisoners in Mississippi. Corrections Corporation of America and Cornell Companies were 2 early contractors. The latter was acquired by Geo Group in 2010, which took over its 3 contracts in Mississippi. Prisoners and their families made numerous complaints about conditions in these facilities, citing high rates of violence and sexual abuse. rampant drugs, lack of medical care and education, and other problems. Class action suits were filed by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the ACLU National Prison Project against 2 private facilities with the most egregious conditions. They filed suit against Walnut Grove Youth Correctional Facility in 2010. This case was settled in federal court in 2012, requiring the state to quickly transfer youth offenders to a state-run facility to be operated according to juvenile justice standards. They were transferred to Central Mississippi Correctional Facility.